Disrespect is rarely loud. It doesn't always arrive as anger or chaos. More often it walks in calmly, sits comfortably, and watches to see what you will tolerate. It is not a moment of weakness. It is a test, a quiet calculation, a deliberate adjustment of power designed to measure how much ground you are willing to give away without resistance. Some people do not raise their voice to dominate. They lower their regard. They withdraw acknowledgement, minimize presence, and subtly rewrite your position in the room. And the danger is not the act itself. The danger is how easily it is normalized, how quickly silence is mistaken for peace, how often patience is confused with permission. This speech is not about reacting. It is about seeing clearly, about understanding that disrespect is not an accident of emotion, but a language of control. And once you recognize the language, you stop responding impulsively and start responding strategically. Because real power is not loud, it is composed. It does not beg for respect, it quietly commands it. Disrespect is rarely emotional. It is calculated. Disrespect is often misunderstood as a sudden emotional reaction, a loss of control, or a momentary lapse in character, but in reality, it is far more deliberate than most people are willing to admit. It is not chaos spilling out. It is order being imposed quietly. It is a decision made with awareness of timing, setting, and consequence, designed not to express feelings but to shape power. Disrespect does not usually come from emotional weakness. It comes from emotional awareness without empathy. When someone disrespects you, especially in a controlled and consistent way, they are rarely overwhelmed by emotion. They are observing. They are measuring how you respond, how quickly you doubt yourself, and how much you are willing to tolerate to maintain peace. This is why disrespect often appears calm, casual, and almost effortless. It is not fueled by anger, but by intent. The goal is not to vent feelings, but to test boundaries and subtly rearrange the balance of control. People who use disrespect as a strategy understand something important. Open conflict exposes them. Loud aggression invites resistance. But quiet disregard often goes unchallenged. A delayed response, a dismissive tone, a lack of acknowledgement. These behaviors are subtle enough to deny, yet powerful enough to destabilize. If confronted, they can be minimized. You're overthinking. It wasn't that serious. This denial is part of the design. It shifts the focus away from their behavior and onto your perception, making you question your own judgment instead of their intent. Calculated disrespect thrives in ambiguity. It lives in moments that are easy to excuse and hard to prove. A meeting where your contribution is ignored. A conversation where your words are brushed past without recognition. A relationship where effort is met with indifference. Each act alone seems minor. Together they form a pattern, and patterns are never accidental. Over time, this pattern sends a clear psychological message. Your presence is optional, your voice is secondary, your value is negotiable. This is not emotion speaking, this is positioning. One of the most overlooked truths about disrespect is that it is rarely used against those who enforce clear boundaries. It targets those who are thoughtful, patient, and conflict-averse. People who give the benefit of the doubt. People who prefer harmony over tension. Calculated disrespect depends on this temperament. It assumes you will explain rather than confront, tolerate rather than withdraw, internalize rather than challenge. In that sense, disrespect is not an attack. It is an invitation to surrender ground quietly. Another critical aspect of calculated disrespect is its timing. It often appears when you are gaining confidence, visibility, or independence. It surfaces when your growth threatens someone else's sense of control or relevance. Instead of direct opposition, disrespect is used to slow you down, unsettle you, or pull you back into a smaller version of yourself. It is easier to undermine someone subtly than to confront them openly, and far less risky. What makes this form of disrespect so effective is that it hides behind social norms. It disguises itself as humor, busyness, misunderstanding, or emotional distance. Because it does not look dramatic, it is rarely taken seriously, even by the person experiencing it. This is where the real damage occurs. When disrespect is normalized, it stops being questioned. When it is questioned, it is often dismissed. and when it is dismissed repeatedly, it becomes internalized. You start adjusting yourself instead of addressing the behavior. This is why understanding the calculated nature of disrespect is essential. Once you see it clearly, you stop personalizing it. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What is being attempted here?" Awareness changes everything. You realize that disrespect is not a reflection of your worth, but a tactic aimed at reshaping your behavior. It is not about who you are. It is about how much influence you allow others to have over you. Calculated disrespect loses its power when it is recognized. It thrives in confusion and self-doubt, but it weakens under clarity. When you stop reacting emotionally and start observing strategically, the dynamic shifts. You no longer rush to explain yourself or seek validation. You become measured, selective, grounded, and this composure sends a signal stronger than confrontation ever could. You are aware, you are not shaken, and you are not available for manipulation. Ultimately, disrespect that is intentional depends on your participation to succeed. It requires your silence without awareness, your patience without boundaries, your empathy without self-respect. The moment you withdraw that participation, not through anger, but through clarity, the tactic begins to fail, because calculated disrespect is only effective when the target remains unaware of the calculation. Silence and subtlety are the true weapons. The most powerful forms of disrespect are rarely loud or aggressive. They are quiet, restrained, and easily overlooked, yet they carry a weight that can slowly unsettle even the most confident individual. Silence and subtlety are not signs of passivity in these dynamics. They are carefully chosen tools. They operate beneath the surface, avoiding confrontation while quietly reshaping perception, influence, and emotional balance. Silence, when used strategically, is not emptiness. It is pressure. It appears as unanswered messages, delayed responses, or the absence of acknowledgement where recognition is expected. Subtle disrespect does not announce itself. It denies, it withholds, it removes warmth, affirmation, and visibility without ever stating why. This absence forces the other person to fill in the gaps, often with self-doubt. Questions begin to surface internally. Did I say something wrong? Am I being too sensitive? Should I try harder? The silence achieves its goal not by attacking but by creating uncertainty. Subtlety is effective because it hides behind deniability. A dismissive glance, a half response, a shift in tone. These moments are small enough to be dismissed individually, yet consistent enough to alter how someone feels in the space. When challenged, the person using subtle disrespect can easily retreat behind innocence. "I didn't mean it like that. You're reading too much into it." This response not only avoids accountability but also reframes the target as overly emotional or insecure, further reinforcing the imbalance of power. What makes silence and subtlety particularly dangerous is their social acceptability. Loud disrespect is often condemned. Quiet disregard is frequently ignored. In professional settings, it is labeled as busyness. In personal relationships, it is excused as mood or stress. Because it lacks obvious hostility, it rarely triggers immediate defense. Instead, it slowly conditions the person experiencing it to lower their expectations. Over time, they begin to accept less communication, less acknowledgement, less respect, without realizing when the standard changed. Silence also forces pursuit. When acknowledgement is withheld, many people instinctively try to restore balance by giving more. More explanation, more effort, more emotional labor. This is where power quietly shifts. The person who withholds becomes the center of gravity, while the other adjusts themselves to regain connection. Subtle disrespect turns effort into currency and makes approval feel earned rather than mutual. The imbalance deepens not because one person demands more, but because the other offers it. Another overlooked aspect of silence as a weapon is how it controls the narrative. When someone refuses to clarify, explain, or engage, they leave space for interpretation. And interpretation often works in their favor. The target is left guessing, replaying conversations, searching for meaning. This mental occupation drains focus and confidence. while the person using silence remains composed and unaffected. Control is maintained not through words, but through their absence. Subtle disrespect also creates isolation. Because it is difficult to articulate, it is often difficult to explain to others. "They didn't say anything wrong" sounds weak, even to the person experiencing it. This leads many to minimize their own discomfort, convincing themselves it is not worth addressing. But unresolved discomfort does not disappear, it accumulates. Over time, it manifests as anxiety, hesitation, and emotional withdrawal. The person begins to silence themselves before anyone else does. Recognizing silence and subtlety as tools rather than accidents is a turning point. Once you understand that these behaviors are not random, you stop chasing clarity from those who benefit from withholding it. You realize that constant explanation and emotional exposure do not restore respect. They often reinforce the imbalance. Awareness allows you to step out of the cycle, not by reacting, but by recalibrating your presence and expectations. The most effective response to subtle disrespect is not escalation, but steadiness. Calm consistency disrupts the tactic. When you no longer rush to fill silences, over-explain, or seek reassurance, the pressure reverses. The absence that once unsettled you loses its impact. Silence stops being a weapon when it no longer controls your behavior. In the end, silence and subtlety only work when they are misunderstood. They rely on confusion, politeness, and self-doubt. But when met with clarity and self-respect, they lose their advantage. True strength is not found in loud resistance, but in the quiet refusal to be diminished by what is unsaid. Disrespect is used to redefine your position. Disrespect is rarely about the moment in which it appears. It is about the future it is trying to shape. It does not aim to win an argument, express frustration, or release emotion. Its deeper purpose is to quietly redefine where you stand. When disrespect enters a dynamic and remains unchallenged, it begins to rewrite roles, shifting relationships from balance to hierarchy without ever announcing the change. Position is not established through titles or words alone. It is reinforced through patterns of interaction. Who is listened to, who is interrupted, whose time is valued, whose absence is noticed. These details reveal real standing. Disrespect works by subtly altering these signals. When your ideas are overlooked, your contributions minimized, or your presence treated as optional, a message is being sent, not once, but repeatedly. Over time, this repetition conditions both you and others to see you differently. One of the most effective aspects of this tactic is how gradual it is. Disrespect does not usually strip someone of their position overnight. It lowers it in small increments, allowing the change to feel natural rather than forced. What was once mutual becomes one-sided. What was once collaborative becomes directive. Because the shift is slow, it often goes unnoticed until the new role feels permanent. And by the time it is recognized, challenging it feels uncomfortable, even risky. Redefining position through disrespect also relies heavily on social reinforcement. When one person subtly diminishes you and others do not object, the behavior gains legitimacy. Silence from the surrounding environment is interpreted as agreement. This is how power structures form quietly, not through open declarations, but through repeated behaviors that are allowed to stand. The longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes to reverse, because it no longer feels like an isolated issue. It feels like the established order. Another critical element of this dynamic is internal adjustment. As disrespect continues, many people unconsciously begin to adapt. They speak less, they ask for permission where they once acted freely, they soften their opinions, avoid visibility, or over-prepare before contributing. These adjustments feel like self-protection, but they also confirm the lowered position. The external disrespect succeeds because it becomes internalized. You start enforcing the role that was imposed on you. What makes this form of disrespect particularly effective is that it rarely appears hostile. It often comes wrapped in professionalism, politeness, or emotional distance. Because there is no obvious aggression, it is easy to doubt whether anything is wrong. But respect is not only about politeness, it is about recognition. When recognition is systematically withdrawn, position is being altered. regardless of how calm the surface appears. Disrespect also redefines position by controlling access to information, decision-making, inclusion, or influence. When you are excluded from conversations that affect you or informed after decisions are already made, your role is being narrowed. You are still present but no longer central, still involved but no longer influential. This quiet marginalization is one of the most powerful ways disrespect reshapes hierarchy without confrontation. Understanding this mechanism changes how you interpret behavior. Instead of focusing on tone or intent, you begin to look at outcomes. Has your influence decreased? Has your voice been reduced? Are your contributions treated as optional rather than essential? These are not emotional questions, they are positional ones, and position, once altered, affects every future interaction unless corrected. Reclaiming position does not require confrontation or explanation, it requires consistency. Respect is restored through clear presence, steady boundaries, and alignment between words and actions. When you stop compensating for diminished treatment and begin operating from self-respect, the dynamic starts to shift. People adjust their behavior when they realize the role they assigned is no longer being accepted. Disrespect can only redefine your position if you unconsciously cooperate with the change. Awareness breaks that cooperation. Once you recognize that your standing is being adjusted, you regain the ability to choose how you respond, not emotionally, but strategically. Position is not given once and kept forever. It is maintained through what you allow, what you reinforce, and what you quietly refuse to accept. Your reaction determines who holds power. Power in moments of disrespect is rarely decided by who initiates the behavior, but by who loses control of themselves because of it. Disrespect is designed to provoke, not always anger, but explanation, justification, emotional exposure. The real objective is not to diminish you directly, but to draw you into a reaction that hands over control. Whoever dictates the emotional tempo of the interaction quietly holds the upper hand. When disrespect appears, the most common instinct is to defend, to clarify intentions, correct misunderstandings, or prove worth. While these responses feel reasonable, they often serve the very dynamic they aim to fix. Over-explaining communicates uncertainty. Defensiveness suggests vulnerability. Seeking validation places your value in someone else's hands. None of these responses restore balance. They reinforce the idea that you are reacting to their behavior rather than standing firmly within yourself. Disrespect gains strength from emotional visibility. The more unsettled you appear, the clearer the signal that the tactic is working. This is why subtle disrespect often escalates only after it produces a visible effect. Once someone sees that their behavior creates tension, self-doubt, or urgency in you, it becomes useful. The behavior continues not because of malice alone, but because it delivers control. And control, once tasted, is rarely abandoned voluntarily. Composure, on the other hand, disrupts the entire mechanism. Calm is not passive, it is strategic. When you remain measured, selective, and grounded, you remove the reward that disrespect seeks. There is nothing to feed on, no emotional spike to exploit, no overreaction to point to. This does not mean ignoring the behavior forever, but it means choosing when and how to respond, if at all, from a place of clarity rather than impulse. Another overlooked truth is that reaction trains behavior. Every time disrespect is met with emotional labor, it teaches others how to engage with you. If they learn that minimizing you leads to more effort from you, that pattern will repeat. If they learn that subtle disregard leads to explanation and accommodation, the behavior becomes normalized. But when disrespect meets stillness and boundaries, it loses momentum. People adapt quickly when their tactics stop producing results. Reactions also shape self-perception. When you react emotionally, you may feel justified in the moment, but afterward, doubt often follows. Questions arise about whether you said too much, revealed too much, or gave away too much control. This internal erosion is part of the cost. Maintaining composure preserves not only external position, but internal stability. It allows you to act from intention rather than repair. It is important to understand that choosing not to react immediately is not weakness. It is discernment. Not every moment deserves your energy. Not every provocation requires engagement. Power is conserved by those who are selective with their responses. When you stop rushing to correct every slight, you begin to set a new standard. Your attention is valuable and access to it is not automatic. Over time, this shift in reaction changes the dynamic entirely. Disrespect either stops or becomes obvious enough to be addressed directly, without emotion. In both cases, clarity wins. Either the behavior fades because it no longer works, or it reveals itself plainly, making boundaries easier to enforce. In neither outcome do you lose ground. Ultimately, disrespect is a test, not of your patience, but of your self-command. The person who remains centered decides the pace, the tone, and the outcome. When you no longer allow others to pull you out of alignment, you reclaim authority without confrontation. Power does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who refuses to be moved. Respect is reclaimed through boundaries, not battles. Respect is not restored through confrontation, emotional appeals, or repeated explanations. It is restored through alignment and boundaries. Battles create noise, but boundaries create structure. When disrespect appears, many people feel compelled to defend themselves, to demand fairness, or to seek acknowledgement. Yet the more energy spent arguing for respect, the more respect quietly slips away. True authority does not argue for its value. It demonstrates it through consistency. Boundaries are often misunderstood as ultimatums or distance, but in reality, they are clarity in action. They define what you participate in, what you tolerate, and what you withdraw from without hostility. A boundary does not need to be announced loudly to be effective. It is expressed through behavior, through what you respond to, what you ignore, and how you adjust access to yourself. When boundaries are consistent, they communicate self-respect far more powerfully than words ever could. Disrespect persists where access remains unchanged. If someone benefits from your presence, effort, or emotional availability while offering disregard in return, the imbalance is being rewarded. Boundaries interrupt this reward system. They quietly change the cost of disrespect. When availability is reduced, when engagement becomes selective, and when effort is no longer automatic, the dynamic begins to recalibrate. This is not punishment. It is consequence. And consequences teach more effectively than confrontation. One of the most challenging aspects of setting boundaries is resisting the urge to explain them. Over-explanation invites negotiation, and negotiation weakens clarity. A boundary loses strength when it becomes a debate. The most powerful boundaries are calm, brief, and followed by action. They do not seek agreement. They establish reality. When others realize that your behavior will not bend under pressure or guilt, they adjust accordingly. Boundaries also protect your internal stability. Constant exposure to disrespect, even in subtle forms, drains focus and confidence. By limiting interaction where respect is absent, you preserve energy for spaces where it is mutual. This shift is not about avoidance, it is about prioritization. You begin to invest in environments that reflect your standards, rather than trying to fix those that consistently undermine them. It is important to recognize that boundaries will sometimes be misunderstood or resisted. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may perceive them as distance or change. This reaction is not evidence that the boundary is wrong, it is evidence that it is effective. Resistance often appears when an old dynamic no longer serves one side. Staying steady through this phase is essential. Inconsistency invites testing. Consistency establishes respect. Over time, boundaries redefine relationships. Some connections strengthen because mutual respect is restored. Others fade because they were sustained by imbalance. Both outcomes are forms of alignment. Respect is not about maintaining every connection. It is about maintaining integrity within the connections that remain. When your actions align with your standards, you no longer need to demand respect. It becomes the baseline for engagement. Ultimately, reclaiming respect is a quiet process. It does not require public declarations or emotional displays. It requires discipline, clarity, and the willingness to let go of dynamics that thrive on imbalance. When you stop fighting for respect and start enforcing your standards through boundaries, the power returns naturally. Not because you took it, but because you stopped giving it away.